this webcasting. Again, my name is Dr. Nathan Lowe. I am a Program Director of Grants and Research Projects at the American Probation and Parole Association. I believe I've had the pleasure to interact with all of you on the line today in some capacity over the last several months with respect to the workload time study that I have overseen for all Iowa DOC CBC staff members. And so today, before we get started, I take care of a few housekeeping items. One, make sure that per Beth Skinner's request that your name and/or district, I believe, is clearly visible in the attendee list so they can keep track of who all attended today's webcast. Second, in the dashboard, you'll see a handout section. I have uploaded the executive summary of the time study preliminary findings. It's a brief 2-page document. I believe that may have been distributed out to everyone today, but if not, if you need to access it, you can download it, the PDF there in that aspect of the dashboard. If you have any questions throughout the webcast, I'll keep my eye on the chat dialog box at the bottom. Just say I have a question, and then I will unmute you, and so you can verbally ask your question aloud so everybody can hear you. Okay? Well, I'm going to go ahead and get started. As you all know, this project was supported by the Iowa Department of Corrections Statewide Recidivism Reduction Initiative. As you all well know as well, the nature of this initiative, this is the workload study was just one component of the overall initiative that's currently continue to be implemented and rolled out throughout the state, the Department of Corrections. Of course, here the advisory committee, many of you are on the call today on this webcast. I can't thank you enough for your efforts over the last several months, and from initially putting together the formulas, the business maps, to identifying and getting us to a final activity list that we could use for the time study application, and then of course those monthly calls for feedback on just various aspects of the study and the project altogether. So can't thank you enough. This slide shows the overall project timeline. You can see at the very top where we started March, May of last year, and of course the check boxes indicate the tasks that have been completed to date. And so through June and August, what we did is finalizing the documents, and of course September, October is when we actually conducted the time study, as well as the beginning of the adequacy of time survey for the individuals that participated in that. So we collected data November for the last several months. What I've been doing here is analyzing the results, cleaning the data, getting it to a point where we can present findings and drafting a report. The report has been shared with the executive staff at this point. However, the executive summary, which I've mentioned early on, should have also been distributed to all division directors, and we also did came on site about 2 or 3 weeks ago to present those findings to the district directors as well. And so from this point, after today's webcast, and over the next few months, you can see what our activities or objectives at hand will be. That means prioritizing activities to determine what we call the best 40 formula, which I'll talk to you about today. Adjust inadequate time measures if needed. Again, we'll talk about these things, but basically what that means is once we present the preliminary findings to you today, you can get a sense of how we measured what I consider inadequate time rate, and then see if any adjustments to the average amount of time that was documented per activity need to be adjusted in any way, whether more time is needed, less time is needed, So then we can compute, of course, as you see the last task there, a accurate workload formula by judicial district for the entire state. So those are our end results, and we'll be working on over the next few months. So let me briefly talk about the goals of this assessment. Of course, as you all probably well know, and just want to review and reiterate these information. So basically what we were trying to do is get a sense of, what exactly do CBC staff do? How do they spend their time? What activities do they most often complete? Are there do they perceive any challenges? Or actually, there are real challenges that keep them from being able to complete activities in a timely manner. And of course, once we get a sense of that, we can then kind of reevaluate all of those different types of things. And how it allows the department as a whole to determine where staff should be kind of reallocating how they spend their time around those evidence-based practice goals that are essentially part of this statewide recidivism reduction initiative and really just departmental goals altogether. And then, of course, lastly, where should agency resources be redeployed or increased? More staff needed in certain districts to be able to complete certain activities. Do certain activities need to be taken away from CBC staff in such a way so they can spend more of their time doing more EVP type of activities and tasks, things of that nature. So basically, this workload assessment allows us to do really a number of things. Okay, and so how do we situate that within these overall underlying objectives for any type of assessment? Well, we're able to better allocate resources, and these are departmental resources, judicial district level resources, even within offices. We're able to get very broad all the way to a very specific level of analysis with respect to these various activities that we're documenting and we're able to keep track of. And of course, much of what we do is tied to money. The financial aspects of it, the resources that have been, financial resources that have been appropriated to the department across the districts. And so obviously the more cost efficient we can be with respect to not compromising public safety, certainly that's the goal here. And so workload assessments allow us to do that as well. And of course, holding ourselves accountable from an organizational standpoint. How are our staff spending their time? Is it appropriate? Is it in line, again, with our goals and objectives across the department? So it kind of keeps us a check within the organization as well. Okay. So when we look at all these things together, essentially what we are able to do from a framework standpoint is that we are able to increase efficiency as well as effectiveness. And we're the department as a whole is able to meet its goals, and certainly holding offenders accountable, increasing public safety, as well as being as cost efficient as possible. Those are all certainly underlying objectives that can be accomplished with a workload assessment like this. Now, when we did a brief webinar, informational session, I guess, last fall prior to the commencement of the workload study, I briefly demonstrated some of the time study and the literature, the research supporting the use of workload assessments in a probation and parole setting. Quite frankly, there have been a number of type of research studies, particularly at the state level, that have looked at how officers probation and parole officers spend their time in the community, either working with offender on non-case related issues. And so even APPA, we've been kind of doing this type of work for several years. A number of years ago, in fact, we put together what we call considerations for agencies to look at when they're looking at workload of their officers. That was supported by BGA. Since then, we've been a part of specific studies such as this one, working with state and or local agencies. And of course, you can see the states highlighted in blue here indicate at the state level the agencies where workload studies have taken place. Iowa, and in kind of the most recent chain of events with respect to this type of research that have taken place. So let's get right to it with respect to the findings. Of course, most of this information is highlighted within the brief, again, that was provided to you. And again, if you just joined and you don't have that executive summary brief, you can obtain it in the handout dashboard that should be available on your screen. But basically, with respect to the staff that were involved in the study, as just a reminder, the study was conducted for 4 weeks beginning in September through October of last year. We had a really high response rate. You can see at a rate of 96%, meaning that of the 510 staff that were employed by the department at the time, 491 participated in the study, meaning they at least partly documented activities during that 4-week period in which we were collecting data. With respect to some of the demographics, average age of staff 45, and you can see the time in current position and the average time with the department, 13 and 15. So the bottom line is a veteran staff all around with respect to some of these key demographics. Now, with the offenders who are involved with activities, you can see over 20,000 offenders were involved with the 490+ thousand activities that were documented during the 4-week period of the study. You can see how these offenders with respect to the activities differed across supervision levels. You can see most of which were really at kind of at the higher end, intensive, high normal, or low normal. However, about 27% of offenders who are associated with activities that was reported they were not on supervision or not available for supervision. So all things considered there. Predominantly male, white or Caucasian, and 58%, so over half of them had a GED or high school diploma. So with respect to, you may recall those that are listening here, it took several weeks, if not months, to get to that final list of activities in order for Mark Allen and his staff to be able to develop the application that was used in the database management system. And so in that application, you may recall there's a number of different aspects of the activity that were measured. Of course, the activity, and in three instances, sub-activity, the type. So it was a drop-down menu in which the individual could select activity or sub-activity. The amount of time spent on conducting the activity, as well as the amount of travel and wait time, persons involved, method, location, of the contact, at what point of the system in which the activity occurred, and then, of course, whether there was enough time to complete the activity, whether it was actually completed, whether the staff member needed more time to complete the activity, and of course the outcomes and perceived challenges with respect to that. So we're going to talk briefly about all of these different types of data elements that were collected. So first of all, and as you can see for each of these tables at the very bottom, you can see what the sample size in which the percentages and numbers reference. In this case, and again, this looks at the type of persons that were involved in the activities. So at no surprise, over 60% of the documented activities involved some type of interaction at the individual level with an offender. The next highest was those solitary activities in which there was no one involved other than the CBC staff member. You could see about 14% of those activities involved that. Okay. I'll just give you a chance to kind of look through this table. And again, if you have any questions throughout the presentation of these findings, be sure to just notify me via the chat box. Now, something else to consider here is on the far right column of this table, you can see the average minutes spent per each occurrence of that activity and that particular person being involved. For example, you can see the judge, while only 1% of the activities involve some type of interaction with a judge, each of those occurrences, about 64 minutes on average were spent by the staff members. So again, including waiting time and travel time to those, that helps explain why that is the highest per average minute spent for the people involved with the activities. Here, this table shows the activity method. So which method was used in the conduction of the activity. Of course, computer being the method most often used at about 40% of the activities that were documented. Average amount of time spent per occurrence in which an activity involved a computer was about 19 minutes. Face-to-face method was the next highest at about 26%, and each face-to-face or each activity involving a face-to-face interaction lasted on average about 35 minutes. And again, you can see at the bottom the total number N equals 146,776 documented activity during the 4-week period of the study. This shows the system point, exactly where in the system an activity occurred. You can see 85% of the activities occurred at the supervision level. Probably no surprise, right? Now this includes roughly 62% of the total activities. You can see at the very bottom, this information was not documented for about 38% of the total activities. But nevertheless, we would suspect the same trend would show, even 100% of the activities being documented. Okay. Location of activity most often occur at the office. You can see about 86% of the activities occur at the office, which each of those occurrences, activity that occurred at the office, taking about, on average, about 19 minutes. Now, in some of these tables you may see other, in which you'll see on this table. That is something I'm going to be further investigating to see if we can tease that out in some of these different data elements to see exactly what other captures. Now, when I present the activities, of course, there were 64 unique activities in which CBC staff members could select when documenting the time during the time study. I'm going to show you the top 15, middle 15, and the bottom 15 of the most often those occurred. Overall, what we see here when we look at all 64 activities is that it's spread pretty across all of them. There wasn't any overwhelming activities that were documented that indicated this is how officers spend or staff members spend most of their time. And you can see here are the top 15, and you can only see you'll see that the top 3 contact, icon data entry, and administrative tasks all were above 10% of the total activities reported, right? And so the remaining 61 or so activities that were documented were at a rate of less than 6% of the time. Without getting too ahead of myself, let me just focus a few things to note here on this particular table. Kind of give you an idea of how to interpret this information. So contact. So contact, if you'll remember from the glossary that was provided to staff members, that involved some type of individual interaction with another person. Could be an offender. Most often, that interaction involved the offender and or officer. And so you can see that that was the most often conducted activity during the 4-week period. About 24% of the activities were documented as contact. Each contact, on average, lasted about 19 minutes. Okay. Data entry, those occurred about 20% of the activities involved data entry and ICON, and each of those occurrences on average lasted about 10 minutes. Okay. And you can kind of get a sense of how to interpret the rest of those, with particular attention being made to the average amount of time spent for each occurrence of the activity. Usually people direct their attention to personnel. Why is personnel so high with respect to the average minutes? Well, that includes staff leave. So we did not exclude staff who had indicated prior to the study taking place that they had planned vacation or maybe they had some medical appointments to attend. We asked those staff members to simply select personnel as an activity and document the amount of time they spent in conducting. So that gives a reason why that one is particularly high with respect to the average amount of minutes. Okay. Here are the bottom 15. So these are bottom 10, I should say. So these are the least reported activities or documented activities. How officers spent their time. Treatment plan, emergency response crisis intervention, search and seizure of evidence. Interestingly, staff members indicated that they both offered incentives as well as imposed sanctions about the same amount of time. And they actually spent, on average, a little bit more time offering incentives for positive behavior than they did imposing sanctions. Now, as I mentioned earlier, there were 3 activities in which we asked CBC staff members to indicate some type of sub-activity associated with it. The first being assessment. As you can see here, the assessments that we provided them as a list within the application for staff members to select from. The most often assessment that was documented was the Iowa Risk Revised Instrument, which of the assessments that were completed, that particular instrument was administered 48% of the time. On average, it took about 16 minutes to complete that instrument per the staff member's documentation. And you can get a sense of how to interpret, again, this table. Should just point to the psychosexual instrument, on average, took the longest, 171 minutes to complete, although there wasn't that many of those assessments that were completed during the 4-week period. And there was the other here as well, again, and my understanding is that could be some educational types of testing, or other types of testing that we just did not consider at the time of developing the application. Here's another sub-activity that when the CBC staff member indicated that the activity was ICON data entry, well, we asked them to indicate what type of data entry did they perform. You can see generic notes was the type of data entry that was most often performed, or at least documented. The average amount of time spent on that was about 8 minutes. For a new case, an example, the average amount of time that it took to enter that new case into ICON was about 30 minutes. And lastly, with respect to the sub-activities, transfers. Now, this does not include interstate compact, since that was an activity that was uniquely measured. So this was if a CBC staff member selected transfer case, they could actually indicate the type of transfer. These were fairly evenly distributed across district, and within the office being the 2 most common documented types of transfers. And then the next couple of slides, I'll show you what I consider the completion rate. So again, one of the questions, each time that an activity was documented, a staff member could select what was the outcome. Did they complete the activity or not? And you can see here, this shows the completion, the activities with completion rates at 90% or better. This is particularly relevant to some, like icon data entry, since that was among the most often reported activities that were documented during the 4-week period. 93% of the time, those data entries were completed in a timely manner. So that's good. For the most part, the completion rates across all the activities were good, at least as was documented by the staff members. Now, kind of on the flip side of that, we also measured whether staff members had an adequate time to complete the activity each time they documented it, right? And so they were given the options: no, they did not have enough time to complete it; yes, but maybe they needed more time; or yes, they had enough time to complete the activity. So what what I call an inadequacy rate shows are the percentage of the times in which activities were reported of not having enough time at all, or they needed more time to complete the activity. Right? So you can see here, for example, let's take pre-sentence investigation report. You can see over the of the 1,900 occurrences of that documented by the staff members, about 32% of the time, staff members perceived that they did not have enough time to actually complete those reports. Either they didn't have enough time at all, or again, they completed it, but they needed some additional time to be able to do it. Okay. Now, this is a list of all the activities that had inadequacy rates above 20%. So the remaining activities had certainly somewhere in the range of 2 to 15%. So overall, kind of good with respect to being able to complete in the grand scheme of the 64 total activities that were to choose from. Another aspect of this that we looked at was the perceived challenges by staff members associated with completing activities. And so, interestingly, what I like to direct your attention to is at the bottom, which shows again the total sample size, which would equate to the N, 26,896 of the activities, challenges that were reported associated with the activities. Now, missing data, 82% of total activities. So what this means is that for 82% of the activities that were documented, there were not any challenges indicated by staff members. So what does this mean? One, could have simply just been an oversight when the staff members documented the information for activities, or there were no perceived challenges associated with any of these particular activities. It could be a combination of both. So I found that to be fairly interesting. And just on another side note, this was exactly the same amount, that this rate of 82% missing data was exactly the same amount for the correctional counselors when we conducted that workload study. So the most often challenge associated with activities that was documented was miscellaneous interruptions, excessive caseload, excessive paperwork following up with that. Probably no surprise there. And then the last thing what we did with respect to the time study findings is we looked at the activities by violence and risk, the violence risk level and supervision levels of offenders that were involved in the activities, right? And so we basically, I found this way to be the most, I think, the best way to kind of interpret and understand what we're looking at here. So basically what I did here, and you'll see the numbers ranging from 1 to 10 in the left-hand column. Those numbers indicate kind of the composite score of adding the violence risk levels and supervision levels for the offenders that were involved in the activities. So basically the way that we interpret this is that 1 would indicate an offender, an activity involving an offender who has been assessed at probably a low violence risk level, as well as being on a low level of supervision, right? And so the higher up of the composite score you go on the scale, going up to 8, 9, 10, that would indicate an offender or activity that's involving an offender that's at a higher risk level and higher supervision level, right? So we can look at this from this lens. And basically what you see here is a trend with respect to the amount of activities that were documented involving offenders at these various levels. And so most of the activities that occurred or that were documented involved offenders that were assessed somewhere kind of in the moderate range with respect to risk and supervision. You can see there with the composite scores of maybe 5, 6, 7, 8. Those were most of the offenders, which you would typically see in any type of risk and supervision level actuarial process. This is where we would see offenders kind of being placed, right? Where a small percentage of offenders are at the higher level as well. As you can indicate there, those with a composite score of 10, had involved in activities in which they were involved in about 1% of the time. Now, what I'd also like to direct your attention to is the average amount of time spent per activity involving offenders at these various levels, right? And so, for example, about 21 of the average amount of time spent on activities involving offenders that had a composite score of 1, meaning at the lowest end of this spectrum, was about 21 minutes. Now, what you'll see here is that there really isn't a lot of variation among the average amount of time spent across these various risk and supervision levels of activities involving these offenders. Right, which is this is something that we would normally see. For example, we would see less time being spent on the lower level offenders on average, and more time being spent on the higher level offenders. It seems like on average, the most time spent per activities involving offenders that had a composite score of around 7. So kind of the moderate to high range of offenders. Okay. And of course, we can examine this combination of risk and supervision levels in different ways. This is simply just one way of kind of interpreting that information. So that's it with respect to the time study. Now I'd like to kind of bring your attention to the adequacy of time survey that we followed up. So we did this via the web within a month following the time study. It's provided additional opportunities for staff to input specific activities. The staff feel that they may need more time. So we used the same list of activities that were included on the time study, as well as included 13 items that measured occupational stress and role strain as perceived by the staff members. Unfortunately, our response rate wasn't as great with the survey as it was with the time study. You can see we have a response rate of about 67%. This is fair, still adequate rate to be able to provide us with some generalizable results and give us some good feedback and insight, but nevertheless, we would, of course, like that to be a little bit higher. And you can see some of the demographics here. I'm not going to spell all of those out, but pretty consistent, certainly with what the staff that were involved with the time study. One thing to note that precisely about 86% of the respondents of the survey had either a bachelor's degree or an advanced degree, so well-educated staff across the state of Iowa. And of course, they're all veterans for the most part on average. Many, many years working in their position for DOC and in the field altogether. So with respect to adequacy, the activities that were, which participants were surveyed on, only 15 activities had what I considered favorable time adequacy ratings. So basically, as you see at the very bottom of this slide, participants were asked to rate using a Likert scale from 1, which meant never, to 5, always, whether they had enough time to complete each of the 64 activities that they had documented as part of the time study. And so what I did was I took the average score, or the average rating of each of the activities. So those with an average of 3.6 or greater, I would consider having a favorable time adequacy rating. And so as you can see at the very top, the first bullet here, these activities generally pertain to those involving the offender, documentation, court or parole hearings, and other types of personnel matters. And then there was a bulk of activities that were rated by respondents as sometimes, meaning they kind of fell right in the middle. So maybe sometimes staff members felt like they had enough time to complete those activities, and other times they just didn't. There was no necessarily any similarities between those activities. A lot of variation among them. And then finally, there was about 9 activities that what I considered unfavorable time adequacy ratings, meaning that they had ratings that would be indicative of never or rarely having enough time to complete them. So those would be just miscellaneous events, not necessarily not reflective of the activities having the highest inadequacy. So some inconsistency with respect to what was reported with the time study documentation as well, which is not very much of a surprise here. I mean, perceptions, it can be common that perceptions differ than maybe what's in reality, what actually occurs. Now, similar, really no, almost verbatim to the challenges that were documented in relation to the activities performed in the time study. And so again, we asked the participants of the survey to indicate the top 3 challenges they most often experience in completing activities. Those top 3 are the exact top 3 that were, again, documented as part of the time study. So probably no surprise there. And then lastly, we asked, again, staff members, the participants, their perception of occupational stress and role strain. And basically, these are measures that have been validated across a variety of different studies, and so they provide us an accurate measure of someone's perceived strain and stress that they face in completing day-to-day activities of their job. But as indicated on this slide, overall, respondents did not perceive to have a high level of stress related to their work. Collectively, on average, respondents rated experienced stress sometimes, at best. And then in terms of role strain, on average, respondents indicated they experienced less strain in relation to the roles as staff members. The highest rated item pertained to staff members knowing their responsibilities, which on average, which is indicated as often, which is good, right? And so there's 2 items that reflected some type of negative connotation, meaning rules never seem to be clear, or maybe there's too many people telling others what to do, that were rated by staff members as being experienced rarely or sometimes. So overall, what this information tells us is that CBC staff members across the state, on average, either don't perceive to experience a lot of stress or role strain associated with their job, or it's a matter of how they're resolving the stress and strain they experience. And from my understanding, there has been some programming put in place in recent years, maybe months, that have attempted to try to help facilitate how staff members are kind of taking care of themselves and the stress and the strain that they face in the conduction of their jobs. So this is good. So at this point, that concludes kind of providing an overview of the findings with respect to the time study and the survey. This is what we know, right? This is, so we know the most commonly performed activities, the time associated with those activities. We do have some anecdotes with respect to recommendations by staff in the survey that we have on file. Of course, we have the demographics with respect to the offenders as well as the staff members that were involved in the study. And the amount of the adequacy of time, whether it was favorable or unfavorable, the stress and role strain, and of course the challenges associated. So we have a lot of information that we're able to use in various ways with respect to this project. Here's what we don't know, and this is really important as a takeaway here. And this is the work we have left to do. We have to prioritize the activities with respect to aligning them with the department's EBP goals and objectives. How much time, for example, should staff members be spending in completing treatment goals or treatment objectives with respect to involving offenders? How much time they should be spending on administrative tasks? And so we look at that and we prioritize those, and that's something we're going to be asking, I think, folks on this participating in this webcast to be involved in. And so that allows us to you all give a more accurate indication of whether activities need to be reduced or eliminated, and also looking at the average amount of time spent per activity, whether that needs to be adjusted as well. Then that way, again, as I mentioned at the beginning of this webcast, it allows for a more accurate allocation of resources and realigning those practices and activities per judicial district across the state, and even to some extent within the office, to be able to get us to that final workload formula that you all can be able to use and reevaluate on an annual basis. In a study like this, usually the best practice suggests maybe about every 5 years to be completed. But nevertheless, you'll actually have the workload formula that you'll be able to use month to month, and again, make any modifications to the formula on an annual basis to that extent. So that kind of takes us to the next steps. And what we want to be able to do, and this is something we did in the correctional counselors study, is develop the best 40. Okay? So this is a term that's being used with respect to the best 40 hours that CBC staff members can spend their time on a weekly basis. And of course, part of that again is prioritizing how the activities and the amount of time spent on the activities. So priority one, of course, these are just examples, but activities that involve evidence-based practices. How much time should staff be spending and completing those types of activities on average on a weekly basis? This allows you to kind of review and sort and prioritize those, identify areas, again, to reduce, eliminate, look at the adequacy of time, rankings, or ratings, I'm sorry, across these various activities, and then, of course, make adjustments to the average amount of time. So that'll be one of the immediate next steps, is to look at that. And this is one example, and it's pretty straightforward. You take all the activities and you simply maybe come up with four different types of classifications, and then you can indicate to what extent, which classification that particular activity falls within, and then we can kind of collapse those down, and then you can see in the far right-hand column the average amount of time. So, for example, we said that we found that contact was the activity that was most often documented during the 4-week period. And on average, each contact, the amount of time spent conducting each contact was around 18 or 19 minutes. Well, we need to reflect on whether that's accurate or not. Does it need to be 20 minutes, 25 minutes? Should it be 15 minutes? I suspect it may also vary by the offenders involved with the activities, their risk or supervision level. So, you know, looking at those various types of factors to be able to make that estimates as accurate as possible with respect to the average amount of time that should be spent on each of these activities. Okay. And let's see if that cut off. I think this shows, this is an example of a study we did with Montana Department of Corrections. And with their probation and parole officers, the same type of study, same type of methodology. And what this actually shows you is breaking down the activities that were case-related and non-case related. And you can see among the case-related activities, we're able to kind of differentiate between the different levels, supervision levels, and also look at caseload sizes across those levels. So this is, and you can see all the different factors that play into considering the workload formula. At the very bottom of this table, you can see the total estimated hours needed for the officers that were involved in this study, total estimated hours available, and then again, it gets you to the additional number of officers needed. Now there's different ways, again, you can interpret and translate staff needs or additional staffing. One way that seems to be pretty digestible is annual FTE. So basically what we can do is translate the workload formula to compute the average or the kind of the annual FTE for one staff member to be able to complete the activities associated with their job based on the information we obtained through this study. And we can look at that by judicial district, okay? So it allows us to be fairly accurate. So this is an example of, in the end, what the matrix will look like for you guys in Iowa. Okay. So this is just kind of highlighting or summarizing what we've been doing and where we hope to be going as well. I think at this point you all understand the importance, hopefully. And while we did this, how this information can be used, kind of disaggregating the data, looking at trends across the districts. I know there's probably a lot of interest like that. You know, what does my district look like? What are the staffing needs in my district? What are the annual FTE of my district? How are staff in my district spending their time according to the time study, et cetera? So we'll be able to provide that information in the next couple of months. Okay. So at this point, certainly I'd like to spend the next, I don't know, 10 minutes or so. If anybody has any questions, they can, again, give some indication in the chat box if you have a question about anything that was covered here today or that was covered, that was noted in the handout that hopefully you've received. And I'll be more than happy to answer those to the best of my ability. So again, if you have a question, just give me some indication in the chat box so I can unmute your line. Well, at this point, Beth, there doesn't seem to be any questions. I'm not sure if you have any thing you'd like to add or recap on the projects we have.
I really don't at this point, other than, you know, you did a nice job covering the next steps. I think between Jennifer and Laura and me and you, Nathan, of course, when you talk about some timelines just around, you know, disaggregating the district data, bucketing the priorities, and then talking about the best 40 survey. So that's something we can just continue to have discussions on. But that's really all I have at this point.
And Nathan, this is Jennifer, just wondering when you'll have the recorded link available. Some people weren't able to get on.
Should be able to have it by, I mean, immediately, essentially. It'll take some minutes to be able to download. And then as soon as I have that link available, I'll certainly share it with you guys so you can distribute it.
Sounds good. I think that's all we have here, Nathan. Thank you. We appreciate it.
Thank you. Good job.
Always well done.
Good. All right. Well, thank you, guys. And again, there's no other questions. Of course, if you have a question that comes up, you can reach me at nlowe@csg.org. Don't hesitate to reach me for anything, any type of clarification regarding these findings. I know there's a lot to digest here. So, other than that, we'll conclude this webcast. And again, I'll be making this recording available by close of business today. So I'll get it out to you soon. Thank you for your time and attention. Talk to you soon.